I never thought I'd use my own father's medical records to save my business. But there I sat, watching sunlight glint off the polished oak conference table while my younger brother smiled like he'd already won. The mediator's pen hovered over her notepad, and I could feel my entire life's work slipping away. 43 years of building Sweet Haven Bakery from nothing, and Tyler wanted half. Not because he'd earned it, not because he'd worked a single day in my kitchens, but because Dad, in his confusion, had apparently promised him something that was never his to give. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my briefcase. Inside was a manila folder I'd prepared months ago, documentation I'd hoped never to use. Tyler leaned back in his chair, confident and relaxed. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did his lawyer, that sharp-dressed woman from Edmonton who'd spent the morning painting me as a selfish sister who'd stolen family legacy. The mediator, Patricia Huang, seemed sympathetic to Tyler's case. Too sympathetic. I watched her nod along as Tyler described Dad's supposed promises, and I knew I had to act now or lose everything. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. Tyler was 7 years younger, the baby of the family, charming and bright, but never quite willing to put in the work. Mom used to say he had potential. Dad would ruffle his hair and call him our little genius. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who helped in Dad's carpentry shop after school, who learned to balance books before I learned to drive, who understood that success meant sacrifice. When I was 19, Dad pulled me aside in his workshop. The smell of fresh sawdust filled the air as he handed me an envelope. $5,000. Start something, Julia, he said. You've got vision. Mom had been diagnosed with early-stage diabetes that year, and money was tight. That $5,000 represented months of Dad's overtime at the mill. I took it and promised myself I'd make him proud. Tyler was 12 then, already showing signs of being what Mom called academically gifted and what I privately called allergic to hard work. He'd rather read about success than build it. I opened Sweet Haven Bakery in 1982 with that $5,000 and a recipe book inherited from Grandma Rose. The location was a tiny storefront on 17th Avenue in Calgary, barely 600 square feet, but it was mine. I worked 18-hour days, arriving at 3 in the morning to start the ovens, staying until 8 at night to clean every surface until it gleamed. The smell of fresh bread became my perfume. Flour dust settled into my hair, my clothes, my skin. Within 2 years, I'd paid back Dad's loan and opened a second location. By the time Tyler graduated high school, Sweet Haven had 5 locations across Calgary. By the time he finished his business degree at the University of British Columbia, I employed 47 people and had annual revenue of $3.2 million. Tyler became a business consultant. He moved to Vancouver, then Edmonton, chasing contracts and clients. He had an MBA, impressive business cards, and a talent for telling other people how to run their companies. But he'd never built anything himself. Tyler's flaws were apparent to everyone except him. In 2008, he started his own consulting firm with money borrowed from 3 different credit cards. Within 18 months, it collapsed. Bad contracts, lavish spending on office space he couldn't afford, clients who never materialized. He called me from Edmonton, voice thick with desperation. Julia, I need help. I wired him $15,000 the next day. He paid back $3,000 over the next year, then stopped mentioning it. In 2015, he tried again with a tech startup. Something about streamlining supply chains for restaurants. He needed investors and I was family. Just $25,000, he promised. You'll make it back triple. I gave him $30,000 because I wanted to believe in him. The startup folded in 8 months. This time, he didn't even pretend he'd pay me back. Both times, he resented needing my help. I could see it in how he avoided eye contact, how he changed the subject when our success came up at family dinners. My bakery empire reminded him of his failures. When Tyler's lawyer first contacted me 6 months after Dad's funeral, I thought it was a joke. A formal letter on expensive letterhead, claiming Tyler had legal right to 50% ownership of Sweet Haven Bakery, based on verbal promises our father had made. This is ridiculous, I told my lawyer, Anthony Wu, over coffee at my flagship location. Customers chatted at nearby tables, unaware that everything around them might soon belong to someone else. Anthony read the claim carefully, his expression growing serious. He's invoking promissory estoppel. Claims your father made specific, repeated promises that Tyler relied on to his detriment. Says he passed up business opportunities because he was waiting for his inheritance. What opportunities? His businesses failed because he's lazy. That's not how courts see it, Julia. If he can prove your father made clear promises and that he reasonably relied on those promises, ownership documents might not matter. My coffee went cold as Anthony explained the legal landscape. Alberta law recognized verbal agreements under certain circumstances. Family promises carried weight. Can he actually win? Yes, Anthony said quietly. He can. The first family dinner after mediation started was a disaster. Mom hosted at her house in Brentwood, the same house where Tyler and I had grown up. She'd made pot roast, Tyler's favorite, which felt like a betrayal even though I knew she was just trying to keep peace. My husband, Brian, squeezed my hand under the table as Tyler arrived late, breezing through the door with wine and apologies. Sorry, everyone. Mediation prep ran long. He smiled at me, and I wanted to throw my plate at him. Mom's sister, Aunt Helen, was there with her husband, and they clearly didn't understand the stakes. Isn't it wonderful the kids are working together on the business? Helen chirped. Family businesses are such blessings. Tyler's smile widened. I bit my tongue until it bled. Brian steered the conversation toward neutral topics, asking about Tyler's consulting work, but Tyler kept circling back to Sweet Haven. Julia's done incredible things, he said, raising his wine glass. Built from Dad's investment into something remarkable. A real family legacy. The emphasis on family felt like a knife. Mom looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Brian snored softly beside me while I stared at the ceiling, calculating everything I stood to lose. Sweet Haven wasn't just a business. It was 43 years of my life. It was the early mornings when my hands cramped from kneading dough. The late nights balancing books at the kitchen table while Brian fed our daughters dinner. The pride on Dad's face when we opened location number 10. It was every employee I'd trained, every recipe I'd perfected, every decision I'd made alone because no one else cared enough to help. Tyler wanted half of that. Not because he'd earned it, but because Dad, in his final years, had apparently made promises neither of us had heard clearly. I thought about those conversations. Christmas 2019, Thanksgiving 2020, Dad's 75th birthday in March 2022. I'd been present for all of them. What had Dad actually said? At 3 a.m, I got up and made tea. I sat at my kitchen table and made lists. Every loan to Tyler. Every time I'd supported him. Every failure he blamed on bad luck instead of bad choices. The folder had been prepared 3 months ago, shortly after Tyler filed his lawsuit. Anthony suggested documenting everything, just in case. Family disputes get messy, he'd warned. Emotions cloud judgment. But documentation doesn't lie. I'd spent weeks gathering papers. Bank statements showing loans I'd given Tyler that were never repaid. Emails where he promised to contribute to Mom's care costs, then vanished. Business registration documents proving Sweet Haven was incorporated in my name alone, that Dad had never been listed as a partner or a shareholder. Contracts showing every location lease signed by me, every employee hired by me, every decision made by me. But the most important document was at the bottom of the folder. Dad's medical records from 2018 through his death in 2022. Records that showed something Tyler either didn't know or had conveniently forgotten. I held the folder now, my insurance policy against my brother's greed. The question was whether I could actually use it, whether I could weaponize our father's illness to save my business. Outside the mediation room, I made my decision. Before we continue, I said quietly, interrupting Tyler's lawyer mid-sentence, I'd like to introduce some evidence. Patricia Huang looked up from her notes. Tyler's confident expression didn't waver. He thought he knew everything I had. Anthony gave me an encouraging nod. I slid the folder across the polished oak table. This contains documentation relevant to Tyler's claims. Bank records, business registrations, and medical files that I believe the mediator should review before we proceed. Tyler's lawyer, Vanessa Bright, reached for the folder first. Her perfectly manicured nails flipped through pages, expression shifting from curious to concerned. Tyler leaned over to see what she was reading, and I watched the color drain from his face. Medical records? Patricia asked. Yes. Our father's medical records from his family physician, covering 2018 through his death in March 2022. Tyler found his voice. What does Dad's health have to do with this? Everything, I said simply. According to your claim, Dad made specific promises to you on specific dates. Christmas 2019, Thanksgiving 2020, March 2022. Those promises form the basis of your lawsuit. He did make those promises. Multiple times. I don't doubt he said something. But what he said and what you heard might be very different things. Tyler's face flushed red. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying Dad was sick, Tyler. Confused. And you either didn't notice or didn't care. Vanessa held up a hand. Julia, perhaps you could explain what these medical records show. I took a breath, steadying myself. Dad was diagnosed with early-stage dementia in October 2018. Dr. Hamilton's notes are very clear. Progressive cognitive decline, increasing confusion, difficulty distinguishing past from present. By 2020, he shouldn't have been making any financial or legal decisions without family oversight. The room went silent. Patricia flipped through the medical records, her expression shifting. Tyler sat frozen, staring at the papers like they might change if he looked hard enough. That's not Dad, didn't have dementia, Tyler stammered. Mom had diabetes, but Dad was fine. Dad had dementia for 4 years before he died. You would know that if you'd been around. Tyler's lawyer was speed reading through Dr. Hamilton's notes, her confident demeanor cracking. Who knew about this diagnosis? Patricia asked. I did. Brian did. Mom did. Dad's doctor recommended we document any major decisions or promises because Dad was experiencing confabulation, mixing memories, making statements that weren't based in reality. I wasn't told, Tyler said weakly. You weren't told because you visited twice a year and called every few weeks. You were busy in Edmonton with your consulting work, remember? My voice stayed level, but anger simmered beneath. Meanwhile, I was the one taking Dad to doctor appointments, managing his medications, eventually moving him into assisted care when he couldn't live alone anymore. I was the one dealing with the reality of his illness while you were building your career. Tyler's hands clenched into fists on the table. If Dad was so confused, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't someone call and say, hey, Tyler, Dad has dementia, you should know. I assume Mom told you. She said she did, actually, after the diagnosis. You said you'd come visit more often, help more. But you didn't. You sent a card on his birthday and called on Christmas. Patricia intervened gently. Let's focus on the legal implications. If Harold Kensington had documented cognitive impairment during the time frame Tyler claims these promises were made, that significantly impacts the validity of those promises. Vanessa was reading Dr. Hamilton's notes from Christmas 2019. Her lips pressed into a thin line. These notes indicate Harold was experiencing moderate confusion and memory lapses on December 23, 2019. That's 2 days before the conversation Tyler describes. My longtime assistant manager, Brenda Kowalski, had warned me this would hurt. Family lawsuits are never clean, she'd said over coffee at the bakery a week before mediation. You're going to have to choose between protecting the business and protecting Tyler's feelings. You can't do both. Brenda had been with Sweet Haven for 19 years, since she was a culinary student needing part-time work. She'd risen through the ranks, learning every position, becoming my right hand. She knew the business as well as I did, and she'd watched Tyler's occasional visits over the years. He's never asked about the business, Brenda observed. Never asked about revenue, staffing challenges, expansion plans. Nothing. But now suddenly he's entitled to half. Her loyalty meant everything. When rumors started circulating among staff about Tyler's lawsuit, Brenda shut them down immediately. Julia built this business. Every location, every recipe, every success. That's the only story that matters. Now, sitting in this mediation room, I was grateful for Brenda's support. Some family chose you. Some just shared your blood. Tyler had shared my blood, but Brenda had earned my trust through years of dedication, while Tyler had earned nothing but my resentment. The Christmas 2019 conversation, I said, looking directly at Tyler. Tell everyone what Dad supposedly said. Tyler's voice was quieter now, uncertain. We were in the kitchen after dinner, just the two of us. Dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry about money, son. The bakery is for both my kids. Julia knows it's going to be there for you." I remember it clearly. I believe you remember it. But Dad had dementia, Tyler. His idea of reality was slipping. Maybe he was thinking about the $5,000 he gave me in 1982, and somehow his confused mind turned that into shared ownership. Maybe he wanted to make you feel better about your consulting firm failing again. But it wasn't a legal promise. Tyler's eyes were wet. He said it every time I visited. Every Christmas. Every birthday. He'd pull me aside and tell me not to worry, that I'd be taken care of, that the business was ours. Ours meaning family legacy, Tyler. Not ours meaning you own half. There's a difference, and in Dad's confused state, those lines got blurred. Patricia asked gently, "Did your father make any specific commitments? Transfer ownership documents, change his will, anything in writing?" Tyler shook his head. It was always verbal. Dad said family didn't need lawyers and contracts. Family trusted each other. That sounds like Dad, I admitted. He hated paperwork, hated bureaucracy. But Tyler, I have 43 years of documentation showing Sweet Haven Bakery is mine. Incorporation papers from 1985 listing me as sole owner. Tax returns every year under my name. Lease agreements I signed. Loan applications I filed. Every legal document shows one owner, me. Anthony added, "We also have a letter from Harold Kensington to Julia, dated 2014, before his dementia diagnosis. It says, and I'm reading directly, Sweet Haven is proof that hard work pays off. You took my small investment and built something remarkable. That's all you, Julia. Your vision, your dedication, your success. That's pretty clear ownership acknowledgement." Tyler looked stricken. Vanessa was flipping through bank statements now, seeing loans I'd given Tyler that were never repaid, seeing contributions I'd made to Dad's care while Tyler sent minimal monthly checks. The evidence was overwhelming and Tyler knew it. But I also knew my brother. He wouldn't give up easily. Pride ran deep in our family, and admitting he was wrong had never been Tyler's strength. "There's something else," I said, pulling out another document. "In 2016, Tyler, you started a consulting firm called Pinnacle Business Solutions. You needed capital, and you asked me for an investment." Tyler went pale. "What does that have to do with anything? You told me you had major clients lined up. Restaurant chains, retail operations. You needed $50,000 for office space and marketing. You promised I'd see returns within 2 years. I slid the contract across the table. I gave you $60,000 because I wanted you to succeed. This is the partnership agreement we signed. You were supposed to pay back the principal plus 15% interest. That was 9 years ago. I've received nothing." Vanessa examined the contract, her expression hardening. "This shows a business debt of $60,000, now with accumulated interest at $73,000. Tyler, why wasn't this disclosed in your financial statements?" Tyler's mouth opened and closed. "I forgot about it. It was years ago. You forgot a $73,000 debt to the sister you're suing for millions?" Anthony's tone was cutting. "Let's talk about your other ventures too. Sweet Solutions Technology in 2015, where Julia invested $30,000. Harmony Consulting Group in 2019, another $40,000. Every business failed within 2 years, and none of the investments were repaid." That evening, I drove to Mom's house alone. She was sitting in the living room watching her gardening shows, looking frielier than I remembered. At 78, she'd shrunk somehow, her hands trembling slightly as she knitted. "How was mediation?" she asked without looking up. "Difficult. Tyler's claim is falling apart, but it's destroying our relationship." Mom's needles clicked steadily. "Your father loved you both equally. Different, but equal. Did you tell Tyler about Dad's dementia diagnosis?" The clicking stopped. Mom set down her knitting and finally met my eyes. I told him after the doctor's appointment in 2018. He said he understood that he'd visit more. But you know, Tyler, good intentions, poor follow-through. Did Dad ever actually promise Tyler half the bakery? Mom was quiet for a long moment. Your father said many things in those final years. He'd talk about the past like it was yesterday, make plans like he'd live forever. He loved the idea of family legacy, of his children carrying on something together. But Julia, he never owned your bakery. You built that yourself. Then why didn't you tell Tyler he was wrong? Why didn't you stop this before it became a lawsuit? Because Tyler needs to learn some lessons on his own. I can't protect him forever. The next mediation session felt different. Tyler arrived looking haggard, his earlier confidence replaced by something harder to define. Shame maybe, or desperation. Vanessa had clearly had serious conversations with him about the evidence. She started with a new approach. My client acknowledges that the medical evidence complicates his claim. However, we believe there's still a moral obligation here. Harold Kensington's initial investment started Sweet Haven. That $5,000 loan was family capital, and Tyler, as Harold's son, has legitimate expectations regarding family assets. Anthony laughed. You're joking. Julia paid back that loan in full within 18 months. Every dollar since then has been her own capital, her own labor, her own risk. But without that initial investment, Julia would have found another way. The difference between Julia and Tyler is that Julia builds things. Tyler expects them handed to him. I held up a hand. Let me tell you what I almost lost because of this lawsuit. 3 employees quit because they heard rumors the business was unstable. 2 major contracts were delayed because clients worried about ownership disputes. I've spent $83,000 on legal fees defending myself against my own brother. Tyler flinched. But there's something none of you know yet, I continued, pulling out another folder I'd kept hidden. 6 months ago, when Tyler filed this lawsuit, I started investigating his business history more carefully. I wanted to understand why he suddenly believed he deserved half of something he'd never built. I opened the folder, revealing emails and financial records. In 2021, Tyler was approached by Westside Developments, a real estate company that wanted to buy Sweet Haven's flagship location on 17th Avenue. The property value had skyrocketed. They offered $4.2 million for the building alone. Patricia leaned forward. Go on. Tyler met with them 3 times. He told them he was part owner of Sweet Haven and could facilitate the sale. He promised them access to our business records, client lists, everything. In exchange, they'd pay him a finder's fee of $400,000. Tyler shot to his feet. That's not, I was just exploring options. You were committing fraud. You claimed ownership you didn't have. You tried to sell property that wasn't yours. These emails show you signing preliminary agreements using my business information without my knowledge or consent. Vanessa had gone completely still, reading the emails with growing horror. Tyler, please tell me this isn't true. The evidence was damning. Emails where Tyler described himself as co-owner of Sweet Haven. Meetings where he discussed selling the flagship property without consulting me. Financial projections where he calculated his share of the proceeds. I wasn't actually going to sell, Tyler said weakly. I was just researching value, understanding what the business was worth. You forged my signature on a preliminary sales agreement. That's not research. That's fraud. I felt surprisingly calm now that everything was out in the open. You didn't want half the bakery because Dad promised you anything. You wanted it because you saw dollar signs and figured you could guilt me into giving you access. Tyler sat down heavily, all fight gone. Vanessa was packing her briefcase with sharp, angry movements. I need to consult with my client privately. This changes everything. Patricia announced a break. Anthony and I went to his office 2 floors down. You didn't tell me about the Westside Development situation, he said. I was saving it. I wanted to see if Tyler would drop the lawsuit once he saw the medical evidence. I didn't want to destroy him completely unless necessary. You do realize this could result in criminal charges. I nodded slowly. That's why I'm not pursuing it. Yeah. I just needed him to understand that I'm not the naive sister he remembers. When we returned to the mediation room an hour later, Tyler looked broken. Vanessa spoke first. her voice professional but cold. My client wishes to withdraw his claim for ownership of Sweet Haven Bakery. He acknowledges the evidence presented shows Harold Kensington's statements were made during a period of cognitive impairment and cannot form the basis of a legally binding promise. He also acknowledges that his actions regarding Westside developments were inappropriate and unauthorized. Patricia looked relieved. Does Julia accept this withdrawal? I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. He was 51 years old, and he looked ancient. All the charm and confidence had evaporated, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. I accept the withdrawal, I said. But there are conditions. Tyler's head snapped up. What conditions? First, you sign a legal document acknowledging you have no ownership stake in Sweet Haven Bakery, now or in the future. No claims, no rights, no expectations. Second, you repay the money I loaned you for your failed businesses. All of it. We'll set up a payment plan, $500 a month, until the debt is cleared. At that rate, you'll be paid off in approximately 12 years. I can't afford, you can. You have consulting income. You'll manage. What's the third condition? Vanessa asked quietly. There is no third condition regarding Sweet Haven. But if Tyler ever misrepresents himself as having any connection to my business again, I'll pursue criminal fraud charges for the Westside development situation. Tyler signed the documents that afternoon. His signature was shaky, nothing like the bold scrawl I remembered from childhood birthday cards. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. I'm sorry, Julia. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with years of resentment and jealousy and failed dreams. I wanted to feel victorious. I'd won. My business was safe, my ownership undisputed, my brother's claims demolished. But instead, I felt tired and sad and angry all at once. Sorry for what exactly? For trying to steal my business? For lying about Dad's promises? For committing fraud? For putting me through a year of legal hell? Be specific, Tyler. He turned back to face me and I saw tears in his eyes. All of it. I was jealous, Julia. I've been jealous my whole life. You were always the successful one, the responsible one. Dad was proud of you in a way he never was of me. And when he started talking about the bakery in those last years, I convinced myself it meant something it didn't. I created this whole narrative where I deserved a piece of your success because we were family. You did deserve support, Tyler. And I gave it to you. Over and over. What you didn't deserve was ownership of something you never built. 3 months later, I received a letter from Tyler. It arrived in my office at the flagship bakery location, the one he tried to sell without my knowledge. The envelope was simple, his handwriting on the front. I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages of careful script. He wrote about going to therapy, about finally confronting why he'd spent his life comparing himself to me, about the resentment that had poisoned him. He wrote about Dad's dementia and how he'd refused to see it, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging that the promises he'd clung to weren't real. He apologized again, more specifically this time, for the lawsuit, for the lies, for trying to take what wasn't his. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a relationship. He just wanted me to know he understood, finally, what he'd done. I read the letter 3 times. Then I filed it away in my desk drawer and went back to work. There were new recipes to test, staff to train, decisions to make. Sweet Haven Bakery didn't run itself, and I'd wasted enough time on my brother's drama. But I kept the letter. Maybe that was progress. Sweet Haven continued to grow. By 2025, we had 12 locations across Calgary and Edmonton, employed over 90 people, and had annual revenue of $6.4 million. I'd implemented profit sharing for employees who'd been with us over 5 years, Brenda included. She was officially assistant director now, handling 3 locations. Tyler made his monthly payments on time, $500 every month, like clockwork. He never called or visited, and I didn't reach out. Some relationships, once broken, couldn't be fully repaired. They just existed in a new shape, defined by boundaries and distance instead of closeness. I testified at a family business conference in Vancouver about documentation and legal protection. Anthony had suggested it, thinking other business owners might benefit from my experience. Family promises need to be in writing, I told the audience. Love your siblings, trust your instincts, but protect what you've built. Documentation isn't distrust. It's clarity. The attendees asked questions about mediation, about evidence, about maintaining relationships after legal disputes. I answered honestly. Sometimes you can't maintain them. Sometimes protecting yourself means accepting loss. But you do it anyway because the alternative is losing everything you've built. Mom passed away in her sleep in October 2025, 3 years after Dad. Tyler and I stood together at her funeral, not quite reconciled, but not quite enemies anymore. Something in between. After the service, we walked through Queens Park Cemetery where our parents were buried side by side. The fall leaves crunched under our feet, and Calgary's autumn air was crisp and clean. I'm glad you won, Tyler said suddenly. I looked at him surprised. I'm glad you fought back and didn't let me take what was yours. If you'd given in, I'd still be the same person. Entitled and resentful and blaming everyone else for my failures. Losing that lawsuit forced me to look at myself, and I didn't like what I saw. Are you doing better now? I'm doing differently. I took a job as a business consultant for a firm instead of trying to run my own. It's stable, and I'm good at it when I'm not trying to prove something. I'll never be you, Julia. I'll never build an empire. But maybe I can be okay with that. We stood in silence, looking at our parents' graves. I forgive you, I said finally. Not because what you did was, okay, it wasn't. But because holding on to anger hurts me more than you. Tyler nodded. Thank you. We didn't hug or make promises to stay in touch. We just walked back to our cars and drove away. Two siblings shaped by the same parents, but walking different paths. I'm 64 years old now. Sweet Haven Bakery is my legacy. Built from $5,000 and 43 years of early mornings, hard decisions, and unwavering dedication. Brian and I travel now, visiting our daughters and grandchildren, finally taking the vacations we postponed for decades while building the business. But I still visit the bakeries twice a week. I still test new recipes in my home kitchen. I still remember what it felt like to knead my first batch of dough at 3 a.m, believing I could build something that mattered. The lawsuit taught me that family love has limits, that trust needs to be balanced with protection, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you most. But it also taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, that careful documentation saves businesses, and that moral clarity matters more than easy forgiveness. Tyler still sends his monthly payments. We exchange Christmas cards. It's enough. Sweet Haven will eventually transfer to Brenda and 2 other senior managers through a carefully structured sale. It'll continue without me, which feels right. I built something that outlasts me, something real and solid and good. That's success. Not Tyler's stolen dreams, or Dad's confused promises, or anyone's opinion about what I deserved. Just the simple truth of work done well, a business built honestly, and a life lived with integrity. That's the story I want to leave behind.